I will introduce to you my panelists. They all come from a diverse background, and they'll be discussing a proposal or a proposed plan by the African Development Bank. And to just get a sense of what that plan is, I'd like to invite at this point Dr. Chiji Ojukwu, who is the Director of Agriculture and Agro-Industries Department of the African Development Bank, to run through his presentation. Let's give him a round of applause as he comes up. And as he prepares to come up, let's also acknowledge the presence of President Adesina, who is the President of the African Development Bank. He'll be part of the panel. He's sitting right here. So if we give him a round of applause as well. My typical style is to encourage you to get involved in this discussion. I am the least important person here. And there will be microphones for the audience to participate, ask questions, probe, and make sure that we are engaged so that this discussion at the end of it all is as meaningful as can be. In the meantime, Dr. Ojukwu is presenting the plan.
Thank you, Alan. Your Excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, you've heard much about Feed Africa, and you are wondering what it is all about. So the question is, why do we need an African-wide agricultural transformation? So I'll quickly run through most of the concerns that have led to this and some of the proposals that we have made, and then the panel members can throw their perspectives, and then you can also come in to join in the discussions. Why do we need Africa-wide agricultural transformation? I'm going to present some statistics, most of which you've already listened to, but which will throw some light why we're doing all this and why the President of the African Development Bank has made this one of the 5 high fives. If you look at some of the data we have on the screen, we already said that Africa, 61% of the population is involved in agriculture. But unfortunately, this 61% only contributes 25% of the GDP. And this explains why millions of Africans are living under the poverty line of $1.25 a day. Because while 65% are involved in agriculture, they only contribute less than a quarter of the average GDP. Again, if you look at the yield statistics, for most commodities, we are less than average 25% of the best practice that you can get elsewhere. Then you look at our import-export relationship, and you see the wide gap between what we import and what we export. In the next slide, we also look at the volatility. I think this was discussed today in the opening session on natural resources and metals, and of course food also. But if you look at the difference between food and the others, you see that the food, even though it's also volatile in prices, but less in volatility. Therefore, calling for a diversification, especially towards agriculture. Another issue that will interest us is the issue of urbanization, which has also increased the need for food. And especially, if you look at the slide on the right, you will see that as urbanization grows, then the consumption pattern also grows, and people tend to demand for more premium food than standard food. And this also puts some burden on food supply. There are a number of issues crippling agricultural transformation in Africa, some of which I'll mention briefly. Underperforming value chains, insufficient infrastructure, limited access to agricultural finance, adverse agricultural business environment, limited inclusivity, sustainability, and nutrition. We'll see how we can come back to this after. So what is the response of the African Development Bank to all this? These are the high fives that you've had a lot. Power and Light Up Africa, Feed Africa, Industrialize Africa, Integrate Africa, and improve the quality of life of Africans. I think for the purpose of this discussion, we would focus on the second one, Feed Africa. So when the president of the African Development Bank assumed office last September, one of the first things he did was to convene with the African Union, the UNECA, and a number of African countries, Senegal and DRC in particular, a high-level conference in Dakar in October, which was attended by over 600 participants, most of them ministers of agriculture, finance, central bank governors, development partners, RECs, academia, and private sector. 4 goals were set, and 18 action plans were agreed. And this is based within the framework of the CAADP framework. Let me take you to some of the issues that informed those 4 goals and 18 action plans. I think in the president's discussion this morning, he mentioned most of this. About 50% of Africans, or 420 million, live under poverty line of $1.25 a day. And as he also informed you, if we stay where we are, and if we do nothing, in 10 years, this figure will rise to 550 million. That is why we are concerned. The second reason why we are concerned is that 33% of African children live in chronic hunger. In absolute terms, 40 million children are stunted under the age of 5. And when people are stunted, as you know, it affects the gray matter infrastructure. Most of them drop out of schools. Most of them don't do well. And it's quite a lot of cost, not only to their parents, but to the states. So this is why we are concerned. The third reason we are concerned is the staggering level of imports. Africa spends a net food import bill of $35.4 billion annually. And as you've also heard, if we do nothing, by 2025, this figure will rise to $111 billion annually. Finally, the fourth reason we are concerned is that even what we produce, most of it we don't add much value to it. I think the president also gave example of cocoa, where even though Africa produces 73% of world cocoa, its share of ground beans is less than 16%. And in the chocolate industry, even though the chocolate industry commands over 100 billion annually, Africa's share is less than 10%. And that's why we have a story in Côte d'Ivoire that even though Côte d'Ivoire produces 40% of cocoa, if you go to the hinterland of Côte d'Ivoire and ask and give chocolate to a farmer in Côte d'Ivoire, the farmer is not able to relate that chocolate comes from cocoa. So, in Dakar, we decided to set up a number of goals that relate to these concerns. One is to contribute to alleviating poverty and lifting 130 million out of extreme poverty by 2025. And then, 2, eliminate hunger and malnutrition completely, or zero hunger by 2025. And thirdly, to turn Africa into a net exporter of agricultural commodities, or reducing net food balance to 0 by 2025. And finally, to move Africa to the top of the agricultural value chains, and taking, for example, the cocoa from 16% to 40%. I think Côte d'Ivoire has launched one of its first steps towards this. Quickly, most of these are not just ideas that never existed. Most of these are underpinned by the CAADP Malabo commitments. So I don't need to repeat them since you're already aware of them. The point is, transformation has been happening all over the world. Even in Africa, we've had some pockets of transformation. As you can see, in Kenya, on the horticulture sector, in Ethiopia, in the floriculture sector, even in Nigeria, scaling up farmer registration and efficient input distribution system. We also have pockets of transformation in Rwanda, in Burkina Faso, and so on that. So it's happening, but the problem is not happening consistently, and it is not being scaled up. So the idea is, how do we get this to scale? That is what the whole exercise is all about. So we ask ourselves, what is the best approach that can be used to transform agriculture? And we think that of the 35.4 billion net imports of food commodities, there are 15 of them that are highest in the agenda. And if we focus on this through what we call agricultural commodity value chain approach, then we will be dealing with the issue of transformation. So without spreading ourselves so thinly, we decided that those commodities, either across countries, across ecological zones, that we are spending 35.4 billion net. If we focus on this, then we'll be able to wipe out this net import and transform agricultural transformation in Africa. So that map shows you most of the commodities, where they are located, and the countries and the ecological zones that we want to target. For example, we're also targeting the Guinea Savannah. We're also targeting the Sahel, as well as a number of countries that have comparative advantage. Because most of these commodities that we're spending our resources are commodities that we can actually produce in Africa. To do this, we've been able to identify what we call enablers, and there are about 7 of them. So I'll quickly run through them. Increased productivity. We are working with IIT and a number of CGI centers to look at what we call Technologies for Agricultural Transformation in Africa, TAT. And by investing resources in inputs, mechanization, and so on, we will be able to take technologies from the shelves where they are now to the farmers where they can use them. The second enabler is what we call realized value of increased production. Today, I've told you that we are at the bottom of the agricultural value chain because we are not adding value. So we are going to orchestrate the application of value addition through a number of processes, including post-harvest losses, warehouse receipts, agro-processing zones and corridors, scaling up and replicating innovative models, and establishing agricultural commodity exchanges. We will also, the third one is investment in hard and soft infrastructure. We'll be looking at not only continuing what we are doing in infrastructure, but scaling them up, but at the same time, looking at the soft infrastructure like ICT, which was the part of the discussion today, especially among the youth. The fourth enabler is finance. We cannot do most of this without finance. I will return to the issue of finance later. Then improve environment, improve agricultural environment, especially the policy options. We've drawn a number of policy matrices, including on land, on tax, on tariffs, and so on, without which, if these policy reforms are not there, then most of what we are saying will not materialize. The next enabler is what we include increased inclusivity, sustainability, and nutrition. Yesterday, the issue of nutrition was discussed. Yesterday also, we discussed the issue of women and youths in agribusiness. We're also promoting what we call Enable Youth, where we're trying to bring young people into agribusiness. So with all this, we will see that there is inclusivity and no one is excluded. I think there was a discussion today on energy. What happens to the youths? And the answer was that youths, aged, and everyone will be part of it. So we want everyone to be involved in agriculture, and we will provide the empowerment that is necessary for all to be included. Finally, is coordination. You cannot do this alone. We have to coordinate our efforts. We have to mobilize resources, we have to mobilize energy, we have to mobilize all that is important to see that transformation takes place. In the next slides, I will look at what does it cost to achieve transformation. Our analysis and focusing on these 15 commodities that we want to take to scale in Africa shows that it will cost between $300 to $400 billion in 10 years, or about 30 to 40 billion, but with huge benefits of about $85 billion annually. So, but we need to invest in order for us to get these benefits. So the question is, I'm sure some of you are asking, where will the money come from? If we look at our current level of funding, the African Development Bank provides both in loans and grants about $1 billion annually. The other ODA and donors provide about $3 billion annually. Government spending, total government spending is about $12 billion annually, but only $2 to $3 billion goes to investment in agriculture. Total in agriculture is about $12 billion, but $2 to $3 billion goes to investment in agriculture. The rest goes to overhead, salaries, and other recurrent expenses. Commercial lending stands about $1 billion. So our total lending, our total investment in agriculture is about $7 billion, leaving a gap of about $25 billion annually. So the question again is, how do we fund this? We believe that there are enough resources in Africa to fund agricultural transformation. And if everybody scales up their own efforts, then we can fund this. For example, the African Development Bank will scale up its own efforts from current $1 billion to about $2.4 billion annually. We expect today the average government expenditure in agriculture is about 3%, average of the African countries. This is against the 10% of Maputo Declaration. So what we are saying, if we can raise this average from 3% to 5%, we'll be generating, we'll be doubling what we already put in agriculture today. And if we can rebalance between investment and recurrent, then of course we can even triple what we are putting in agriculture today. Commercial banks. We want to leverage the balance sheets of commercial banks. And we are looking to raise from about 1% to about 4.8% of commercial bank lending to agriculture. Just less than 5%. And we'll be leveraging quite huge amounts from their balance sheets. Today, the president mentioned about the sovereign wealth funds, the pension funds. If we can leverage just 2% only from the over 160 billion of sovereign wealth fund and 380 billion of pension funds, we will be raising substantial amount for investment in agriculture. And of course, the various private equity funds can also yield much more than 25 billion annually. So we can raise more than this without even ODA raising its current investment. We will expect that ODA will also increase. But without ODA increasing and looking at resources that are locked up in Africa, we have enough resources to fund transformation. So since Dakar, what has happened? Quite a number of activities have taken up. There have been a lot of demand since people were made aware that African Development Bank, working with partners, we are co-convening, we are co-developing. There have been quite a lot of demand on most of these activities. And we want to single out 4. Today, we have, between October and today, we have already received a request of $8 billion in less than 6 months. So there are quite about 15 initiatives that we want to focus on. And I'm just going to talk about 4 that have received the most requests. The first one is what we call agropos. What this means is that you take these commodities, 2 or 3 commodities, and you put all the enablers into one zone, and you can transform those commodities to scale. We have some examples where these have been tried. Burkina Faso, Democratic Republic of Congo, the Park Agro-Industrial, do Bokango Lonzo, where the government has already started investing and they've asked African Development Bank to also support them. And we are working to support them. In Tunisia, in Bizat, and Ethiopia, Industrial Park, Nigeria has also asked African Development Bank to support their staple crop processing zone. So there's quite a lot of demand. We have about 12 countries that have started to ask that they develop in this process. The other flagship that we interest, especially the young people, I think this was also presented in yesterday's discussion, is what we call Enable Youth. This program is focusing on young unemployed graduates, no matter their discipline, to bring them into agribusiness by putting them on what we call an incubation center where they are trained, and then empowering them with financial resources to set up their own businesses. We have a target of about 0.5 billion per country and about 10,000 agribusinesses for young people in these countries. Of course, this varies. Nigeria alone is doing 37,000. And with employment factor of about 5%, you can then calculate how much jobs that we want to create. Last month in Abuja, there was a workshop, and about 70 young people were there. And most of them are also into this. We have circulated to you our brochure as well as the Dakar report. You will see some young people, medical doctors, lawyers, engineers, whatever, who have gone into agriculture. Yesterday, the case of Ada Osakwe, a young lady who was working with the president when he was Minister of Agriculture, was also discussed. So young people, there is hope for you, and with Enable Youth, we can support you to find a living and a career in agribusiness. The third flagship, which I mentioned briefly, was the TAT, the Technologies for African Agricultural Transformation. The IITA and other CGI centers are working on this. There are a number of technologies, but they're on the shelves. They are not reaching the farmers. With good practices, with our CG centers and ourselves working together and our partners joining us, we have a program of about 700 million in 5 years to bring technologies to the farmers. Finally, we have a program that we call the Agricultural Risk Sharing Mechanism. Here, we try to leverage from the balance sheet of commercial banks because, as we listened yesterday, most commercial banks think that agriculture is very risky and they don't want to lend to agriculture. We have an example in Nigeria where the central bank has worked with an agency called NISAL, and they've gone from 0.5% to 5% in less than 2 or 3 years to show that there's quite a lot of resources locked up in commercial banks. And if we can share the risk with them, we'll be able to leverage more than 5 times of what we put in order to support most of these programs. Finally, this is not just about the African Development Bank. It's about African Development Bank calling all partners, governments, other agencies, foundations, and so on and so forth, to come together and work with us. As the President said today in his opening speech, this is about co-convening and co-development. So quite a number of partners are listed there, either as co-financers or regional member countries, or just partners bringing their ideas. Let us work together. We believe by working together, we'll be able to achieve this. Something that looks like ambitious, but for us, I think we believe that it's attainable. We've taken this presentation to so many African countries and RECs, and each time we presented them, they all believe that this is an achievable proposal. And we want to bring it to you today to also share it with you and call you to join us as we take this in the next 10 years to take Africa out of poverty, to take Africa out of chronic hunger, and to take Africa to the top of the global value chain. So what is the next going forward? We are working to get this strategy approved by our board next month. As I said, we've already developed a pipeline of $8 billion and it's increasing. Yesterday, we just signed with Madagascar their participation in the Enable Youth program. And we have about 29 countries that have signed on this. We're also developing knowledge and doing advocacy work. We'll be building partnership, as I said, and collaboration. next month in Nairobi, we'll be having the event on resharing financing mechanism to see how commercial banks can also play their roles by contributing to this noble flagship. And then together, we will start to implement. Thank you very much.
I think he deserves a much bigger round of applause. It's taken a lot of work to put that together. Dr. Chidi Ojukwu, thank you very much. At this point, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to start thinking about your reaction to what you've just seen, because I'll be taking your responses in a moment. But I'd also like to introduce you to my very distinguished panel, starting with the lady that's sitting on that panel. Let's welcome Ms. Manal Abdelmonem, who is Chairperson and Chief Executive Officer of SOBEC Trade and Development Limited, based in Cairo. Please come up, madam. Let's give a round of applause. Saint Ange Perrin, Associate Vice President of IFAD, is here as well. Let's give him a round of applause. Mr. Bukar Tijani from the Food and Agriculture Organization, Assistant Director General, and also the Regional Representative for Africa. And we also have the host of this discussion, Dr. Akinwumi A. Adesina, who is the President of the FDP. Let's give him a round of applause as well. And just to make sure, we were expecting the Honorable Amadou Ba, who is Minister of Economy and Finance of the Republic of Senegal. He's not here yet, is he? He's not here yet. If he joins us later on in the session, he'll be more than welcome to discuss what's happening with us. You have heard what the plan is. My question to you is, what do you think, to start with, before I invite the panel to discuss it? Any thoughts whatsoever? Any initial thoughts? I have a whole lot of light hitting my face, so I need to do this a little bit. Any thoughts at all? Could we get the microphones where they need to be as quickly as possible? Yes, I see a hand there. I see another hand here. And there's also another hand here. Let's get them the microphones as quickly as possible, please, so that the questions can begin to come in. You can put these questions directly to the President of the FDB, because this is his idea of how things should go. And what's your question, madam?
Hello, Dr. Wanjiro Kamal Rutenberg, Director of African Women in Agricultural Research and Development Award. I'm thrilled to hear that we're talking about the role of women in research and the role of, first, the role of agricultural research.
Can we just make sure that our mic does better than that, please? You're talking about the role of women, and you're pleased to hear that the role of women is being mentioned.
Yes, and that we're not just talking about women on farms, but we're talking about women across the entire agricultural value chain, including women in agricultural research, which is a really critical component of value chains. Often we talk about value chains as if they start at the farm gate, and it's wonderful to hear us talking about value chains starting at the research end.
Okay, thank you. President Adesina will want to come in on that a bit later. Anybody else? Any thoughts? Yes, madam? Okay, I'm about to fire someone for inefficiency here. Okay. And any more questions as well? We will get this rolling. Yes, sir, we're coming to you.
The Partnership for African Social and Governance Research, Nairobi.
Yes.
I'm worried that I'm not hearing about universities. What's the role of faculties of agriculture in all of this? And there has been a lot of emphasis on anybody doing agriculture. Does that mean that we are still presenting agriculture as a second best subject if there's no future for these graduates?
Very interesting indeed. There was a statistic that was thrown out yesterday that only 2% of university students on the continent actually study agriculture, and yet it's supposed to be transforming the continent. I'll throw that question to the panel. Anybody else?
Thank you so much.
Yes.
I would like just to follow up what the lady has said. I think it's very important to make sure that the relationship of universities, private sector, and the program is emphasized. R&D is very critical, and also it will help us to address the problem that we've been complaining that we don't have the best graduates. Because when we link them, then we are going to develop and produce appropriate qualified students who are able to go and fit in the industry. But very important, I wanted to thank the ADB president because we seem to be thinking the same. Last year...
As briefly as you can.
Yes, last year we initiated an initiative we're championing here in Zambia, which we're calling the 2015 National Economic Diversification, Private Sector-led National Economic Diversification Initiative. And it falls squarely in the areas that you're looking at. So I'm grateful and I'm happy that last night an email was sent to one of your directors and it was directed to him, to the director of private sector. So okay. I'm grateful. You are doing the right thing at the right time.
All right, thank you very much. Let's give him a round of applause and then come to you, sir, with your question.
Yeah, the way I look at it, this seminar has got two topics. One is the hunger, for which we need the productivity in agriculture, and another is capacity development to make it possible. Now, my question is that do we wait until the capacity is developed by indigenous Africans and let people starve to death? Or do we invite foreign investors and be forthcoming and leave the field literally open so that first of all we feed and keep the Africans alive and then teach them how to do agriculture on their own?
Well, thank you very much for that submission. Mr. President, I'd like to start with you. And if we can start from there, actually. Where do you start from?
Well, I don't want to start from there. Is this working? No, I don't think it is. Yeah. First, let me thank Chiji for doing a great job of laying out what the agenda is from us from the bank on agriculture. You know, when somebody asks the question, is there a future for agriculture? I was Minister of Agriculture in Nigeria. I read agricultural economics, and I'm president of the African Development Bank. Think of a future in agriculture, right? I think that I want to just clarify a number of things because we have ministers of finance here about this, what we are discussing about today. First is we have economic headwinds that the countries are facing. Right? We've talked about that in my opening speech. I'm not going to go through it, but we all know what those issues are. But I want to bring your mind back to 2008 when we had a global commodity, food crisis in which Africa, being a net importing region, was significantly affected. And so you can't have a situation in which the global commodity prices for oil and gas and all of that, things go like that. And if there were to be a shock again in the system, where are you as ministers of finance going to find the money to import the food? We're spending $35 billion importing what we should be exporting. I think that the message I want to send is that the kind of agriculture transformation we're talking about today is really for ministers of finance to understand that agriculture is central to how you do macroeconomic and fiscal stabilization of countries. When a central bank governor sits down and has to run a lot of monetary policy, what do you try to do? You try to basically make sure that you manage your monetary supply because you want to keep inflation down, right? But you take a look at your consumer price index, 65% of what you have inside of that is the price of food. So if you produce a lot of food, you keep inflation down, you make your monetary policy actually much easier. So the point I want to make first is it's time to look at agriculture totally differently. Look at agriculture as a business. Look at agriculture as the sector that allows you to diversify, to create jobs, to revive rural economic areas, right? In particular, to reduce your dependence on food imports, to strengthen your currencies, right? Actually help you to avoid devaluing your currencies, by the way. And at the end of the day, look at agriculture as the way that you actually can earn a lot more in terms of foreign exchange earnings by diversifying and being competitive. I think Chiji raised those issues very, very well. And that was why when I called for the meeting in Dakar, I was delighted that we had 62 ministers of finance, ministers of agriculture, and also central bank governors. We've got to keep that momentum. Because if there's anywhere that Africa can diversify into what it has comparative advantages, it's in agriculture. 65% of all the arable land left to feed 9 billion of us by 2050. It's not in Asia, it's not in Latin America, it's not in Europe, it's not in the United States, it's right here in Africa. But we can't keep sitting on potential. There's no market for it. You can't sell it. You've got to unlock it. And that's why, as a bank, we've said, look, we're going to help our countries to look at it. So please, let's look at a different kind of agriculture, a more productive agriculture, a more modern agriculture. You know, poverty, nobody wants to be poor. I grew up in poverty. Nobody wants to be poor, right? But by transforming agriculture, you impact on women massively. You get a lot of young people working with jobs. And that's really the passion that we have here for this new agriculture that we are talking about today. I also want to say something about the issue of women. You know, just when I was coming up here, I forgot your name, please, madam. No, right over there, just next to you. Mrs. Banda. And I didn't recognize her because I took photographs with her yesterday, but she was in a different attire. But she told me that she started agriculture as an entrepreneur at the age of 12. And that today, her products are all over the world. And next to her is Florence Wambugu. Dr. Florence Wambugu is one of the world's leading biotechnologists. She's from Kenya. And phenomenal work on tissue culture banana that raises the yield of bananas from right about 13 tons per hectare to 40 to 50 tons per hectare. There is a program that we support that's called Our Word, Agricultural Women, what's the whole thing for Our Word? It's Agricultural Women in Research and Development. These women, I said this morning, if you get women right, you get everything right. The women researchers have to be supported. I agree with you completely. And I'm all for that from the African Development Bank because you understand the needs of women better. You understand nutrition issues better, biofortification issues, nutritional supplementation issues, water and sanitation, maternal health care that are very important for us to be able to transform food into better nutrition for kids. So I think that at the bank, we will strongly support that. And at the bank, I don't know if Geraldine is here, but she's not. But we've launched an initiative called Affirmative Finance Action for Women. And I mentioned it in the morning. And that initiative is to leverage $3 billion specifically for women. Women businesses, women farmers, women entrepreneurs. Because when you unlock that capacity of women, you transform Africa. I'll just end on one comment. Dr. Sanginga sitting over here, he's one of the world's leading scientists, is the Director General of IITA, the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture. When I was a much younger scientist, I supervised his brother's PhD thesis, and it was on soybean adoption in northern Nigeria. And there was a woman there who was growing soybean. It was in the early 90s. And I can't forget in the thesis research what he found. The woman was interviewed, and she said as follows. She said, I grow soybeans. I find market for soybeans. I make money for soybeans. I send my kids to school with soybeans. My kids are healthy because of soybeans. I build a house because of soybean. I put clothing on myself because of soybean. He says, soybean is like my husband. He said, if you have soybean, what else do you need in a husband? So I think it's just to tell you the transformative power of agriculture for women. And I just want to say that as we do all of this, the role of women is fundamental. And thank you. I just want to make those remarks.
Thank you very much for that great submission. But let me just stay with you for a minute there. The figures that are in this presentation say 49% of Africans, or 420 million, live under the poverty line, and it could get worse in 10 years, or under 10 years for that matter. 33% of African children live in chronic hunger, and 40 million, if nothing is done, the figure could change to 40 million stunted children under the age of 5 as of today. You've got to wonder, it's a very urgent situation. African countries can't afford to wait anymore, can they, Mr. President?
No, you're right, Kasuja. Let's just take the case of poverty. You look at China. China lifted 500 million people out of poverty, not in 50 years, not in 100 years. They lifted that out of poverty in exactly 10 years. And what did they do in China? They got agriculture right. They changed the system on agriculture. The land ownership system was changed. Individuals have property rights. And there you are. China changed overnight. You take a look at that opportunity. It tells me that we can change the poverty situation. Poverty is not pretty. Who wants to be poor? There's no market for it. You don't sell it. And so that's why I really think we must have inclusive growth, go for the sectors that have the highest potential to get people out of poverty, and it is agriculture. 70% of Africans are living in rural areas, and they depend on agriculture either directly or indirectly in terms of expenditures on agriculture. So if the price of food goes up, the poor get poorer, period. Now, the other thing I think it's important is what you said about the statistics, Chiji, on nutrition. Actually, that data is dated. Today, what we have is 53 million children that are stunted in Africa. 20 out of the 24 countries that have malnutrition rates, stunting rates above 40% are in Africa. 24 out of 34 countries that account for over 90% of the global stunting rates are in Africa. And when you are stunted, it doesn't matter what I do for you. You're finished. The brain is gone. The brain cells are gone. And so that's why when we had the debate yesterday, I was excited. The ministers of finance were there. And I said, let's invest in gray matter infrastructure. The first 1,000 days of a baby is the most crucial. It determines what it will be in life, their productivity, either skilled or unskilled. This is crucial. And that's why I believe that for us, Kasuja, it is urgent, and I'm delighted that we are not doing it alone, as Chiji mentioned. Right on this panel, we have IFAD, we have the private sector, we have the food and FAO. We've got all of you that are here, bilateral agencies, the World Bank, USAID, DFID, the JICAs of this world, the Japan, the Chinese, everybody. This is the most important thing for us to do. Raise agricultural productivity, focus on women, get nutritious food, and get financing going into agriculture. For that to happen, for this transformation that you're talking, Kasuja, to happen, that reform you're talking about, we must change our mindset about agriculture. I'm sorry. Agriculture is not a way of life. It is not a development sector. Agriculture is a business. The richest people in the world are farmers. And why is it that in Africa, the people that are in agriculture are the poorest people? No, that has to change. And so we must take agriculture as a business. Focus on value chain development, create opportunities for people, do agro-allied industrialization, and allow Africa to be able to compete. So all that just to summarize that the passion for this change is something that we share at the bank because we think that our two goals of inclusive and green growth can only be achieved if we actually transform the agriculture in a very sustainable way as a wealth-creating sector, not as a poverty-maintaining sector.
Let's give him a round of applause. Very strong submission there. I want your questions to keep coming, but before we do that, I'm keen to hear from the private sector. President Adesina talks about it, and he talks about the key role of the private sector. Ms. Monaim, you do business across the continent. You're based in Egypt, but you've traversed the continent looking at business opportunities. What picture do you find? What more needs to be done in order to make agriculture much more attractive and to make more people wealthy? from it?
Well, what needs to be done is a lot, but let me tell you that a lot has been already happening, and this is the good news, that the production of agriculture in Africa had risen 160%, while among the other world it was 100%. And the second good news that there is a lot of things to be done as well. I think what needs to be done in the continent, that the people need to work together. And if there is an agriculture transformation, we need to address three most important issues, and it has to be focused on three issues: the farmers, the markets, and clusters. The farmers are a key element in all this, and we cannot say that in order to take farmers out of poverty, we need to buy their lands. Personally, as a principle in work, we are, as a partner, against buying lands from farmers, because the transformation, agriculture transformation, need to create social cohesion. We don't need we need to create employment, we need to create jobs, so we need to attract students, and we need to attract youth, and definitely women.
You make an important point. Sorry that I have to interrupt you. How do you attract students? How do you attract youth?
All right. First of all, to get into the farmers, you need to have all this network, and the best people who are extension agent, if you may say, will be the student in the agriculture faculties or school, where they can take the message we want to deliver to the farmers to them, because they are the best person to talk to. Let me tell you how we see private sector. Private sector in agriculture cannot work on its own. Agriculture, it's just definitely, it could be a business, but it also has a human side, which is very important, because eating is a right. Eating is not something luxury. Everybody has the right to eat, and somebody has the obligation to provide that. The private sector cannot do it alone. Private sector needs to have the government, need to have the farmer, need to have the donors, need to have the civil society, need to have the research institution, and the universities, and definitely the media, which is communication. So when you get the students in there, because we've tried that. We've tried that in rural countries in Africa, where during the summer, the students from agriculture school, there were our messengers to deliver a message to the farmer. And what started this, that we wanted to do investment for processing facilities in some of the countries, and the major problem we had is how to ensure that we get the supply to run the factories. Because the farmers, if they want to sell at the gate, and if they have a good offer, they will sell at the gate. So that's how we stopped, and we started from the beginning. That's why I said agriculture is an inclusive business that needs to have all the stakeholders. Everybody has to work together. In order to make an impact, we need to work with the government. We need to understand the priorities. We need to create impact among the youth, among definitely the women, because women, if they are well settled in their farms, it's a great social impact, and social impact is a major issue in Africa. We cannot just ignore the fact that we need to maintain the ruler and to get richer, so not everybody will go to the urban cities, and you'll have nobody's taking care of their farm. Mr. Shiji, he was talking about the cocoa. It is a fact. The cocoa is a big issue. Cocoa, cotton, cassava, coffee, all this is in Africa. We need to be able to have clusters where we can work together by region and there by continent. We need to address what is it that we need to produce on the long term and the short term. Agriculture is a business, but people have to be extremely patient.
That's an important point, because it has to make money for them to remain in the business, but they also have to be patient. It's not a quick win, quick profit business.
Agriculture is not a deal. Agriculture is a pact. Agriculture is that you have a social, it is after all a social enterprise that has to be sustained. But the farmer needs to see where is it his grain. When Mr. Oshiji said the farmer in Cote d'Ivoire did not relate his cocoa beans with the chocolate. Well, in 2012, the value of the chocolate was 10 times the value of the cocoa. So it is, I mean, how can he relate himself with something that costs nothing to something that costs it's very expensive? So it is very important that the farmer will see where is it go, and I think Ethiopia was very good in doing their commodity exchange with the coffee, because the farmer were able to relate to that how they say that profit sharing in a way. That private sector role is to be a catalyst for every stakeholder to work together, be it in a board, to take this, to share the responsibility, to share the risk. Agriculture is a business, indeed, as Mr. President Adesina said. It's a business, risky business, like any business. Business, if you want to make profit, you have to have some risk. The risk will be shared, or at least we try to minimize the risk by having all the stakeholders giving us, sharing their experience. It has to be regional. The African countries need to work together in order to facilitate, to have a one-stop shop for the agriculture. It have the finance, it have the education, it have the health. You need to know the priority, and if it is a long-term investment, there is a way to make quick cash. If you want to plant an olive tree, it will take years. But at the same time, you can make it part of vegetable where you can sell it quickly. So it's...
All right, thank you very much for that. And I'd now like to bring you in, Mr. Perrin. You are with, you're the Associate Vice President of IFAD. And I've got to wonder, the funding for this project, the funding for this transformation is a key part is the most important part of the process, some will say. Where's the money going to come from?
Thank you very much. You're right. Funding is an essential part of the formula for success, but it's not funding by itself. It's not the investment alone that is important. I think we all talked and recognized. The first one, I think today is a demonstration. It's a reflection. You need leadership. You cannot invest in areas where there is no structure, there is no leadership, there's no organization, there's no goal. We have that today. That's a good step. The second is that you don't invest by yourself. You ensure that there is an enabling environment that facilitates or ensures that the investments are going to yield returns, and not low returns, adequate returns for the smallholder in this particular case to derive a commercially viable enterprise, small scale, but viable, so that he can benefit, his living standards can go up, the family is well looked after. For that to happen, there are other aspects that need to be taken into consideration. They need adequate technology to facilitate and de-risk the kind of investment risks that are there. If you don't use the right technology, you can very quickly run the risk of your crop to fail, your livestock to die, and your irrigation schemes to not work. So de-risking is also important, appropriate technology, capacity building. Someone talked about it earlier. We need to emphasize that technology will be taken up when we have adequate technology. Africa is getting better and better prepared for this capacity building to take place, for the right enabling environment to take place, for the leadership to drive the growth, the pathway, and in IFAD we are associated with this, and I have the pleasure to confirm that every year, for the next 3 years, we will invest $500 million in agriculture in Africa, and this is to complement the African development leadership in agriculture in Africa.
Let's give him a round of applause for that. So something is actually being done. There's reason to be optimistic, and it's not all gloom. We are making progress. Now, Mr. Tijani, your work takes you across the continent. You've seen things across the continent. I wonder if there's something that you'd like to add to what we are discussing today, and especially if you'd like to share some success stories that we can learn things from.
Thank you so much. Let me start with 4 momentums. 1, we have a new president for African Development Bank. 2, we have the AU Agenda 2063. 3, we have the UN SDGs. 4, we have the new strategic framework for FAO. What I want to start with, and the good news is, the agricultural schemes information system of FAO is using a spatial system which now can give us real time what is happening across the globe in terms of crops, in terms of weather, and things that cannot be done in 5 years can be done in 10 months. I'm just leveraging on what President Adesina has said. I strongly believe on behalf of FAO that it is possible within the next 10 years or less to make Africa very different. For FAO, we have been part of the AU declaration by our heads of states that we must end hunger by 2025. But it is not just ending hunger. FAO has changed also over time. This changing hunger will have to come with incomes, livelihoods, youth employment in different aspects, encouraging women more, because FAO has been part of those organizations that have stood by women, knowing full well that women process over 70% of agricultural produce across Africa. And it is important for us to stand by. And I want to say that there are a number of evidence-based issues. I don't want to go far. I want to stay here in Zambia. Zambia and FAO have a very good and long relation and partnership. The Zambian government has requested FAO to facilitate its own national strategic grain reserve. You have heard President Edna Lungu this morning talking about good harvest in 2014 and also this year. And it's becoming a net exporter because of the El Nino, because of the climate change impact. FAO is assisting in that, not just in Zambia, but it's also assisting to know what is the extent of the impact of El Nino. What is the extent of supports that can be given, not in dash outs, but to continue with the livelihoods. 2, in Zambia, we have a climate-smart agriculture, conservation agriculture, scaling up. I believe in Zambia we have 104 districts. This program is operating in 48 districts with support from FAO and EU. And this scaling is within what Chiji has mentioned a lot. It has lots of issues about private sector, bringing in the private sector, looking at value chain of inputs, looking at groups, looking at markets, looking at adding value to products produced. By the way, soybean, beans, groundnuts are also part of this value chain. 2 things I will leave this first part of my contribution with.
All right. Let's give him a round of applause. And now, President Adesina, I want to address you as a teacher. You had the question about training and about what needs to be done to build that capacity, the university students. I wonder what your thoughts are now, apart from having been Minister of Agriculture, you've also taught. So one wonders what needs to be done in that respect so that the capacity is built and so that there is a sufficient or critical mass of students or professionals who know what needs to be done in order to improve the capacity of the continent.
No, thanks very much. I think first I just want to say that when we look at capacity for the agricultural sector, we need to look at capacity across the value chain, not the traditional way in which we look at capacity. So you need capacity on the R&D side, and research and development in Africa is terribly underfunded. And I just remember when India, when Indira Gandhi, India was a starving country. A Nobel Prize economist wrote about India at the time that this is going to be the biggest problem for the world, and there is no hope for it. That's a Nobel Prize economist. How wrong? What happened was research and development. Indira Gandhi called Professor M.S. Swaminathan, fantastic Indian scientist, chair of the Indian Agricultural Research Council, and said to him, because they were receiving food aid, and the country is giving them food aid, said, look, we're not going to give you food aid because you have not signed a nuclear non-proliferation treaty with Pakistan. And she called in MS Swaminathan and said, can we feed ourselves? MS Swaminathan said, we sure can, but we need to invest in research, we need irrigation, we need infrastructure, and we need price stabilization. That's it. India fed itself, got out of that problem, not in 15 years, not in 20 years, in exactly 3 years. In 5 years, India became a net exporter of food. This tells you, I just want to say that when we talk about research, let's talk about research that has impact, not just academic research. When I was Minister of Agriculture, in fact, by the way, Bukar Tijani was my Minister of State for Agriculture when I was in Nigeria. We took advantage of rice technology developed by the CGIAR, by the Africa Rice Center. I was minister and I said, look, I talked to Bukar, I said, look, let's get this technology. I was part of the group that developed the technology anyway. I said, let's get it to farmers. We got the rice varieties. We began to work on it. We reached 6 million farmers in 3 years. We expanded area under that Nerika rice variety into 7 million hectares. I think, Bukar, I think that was right, within a period of 3 years. I'm just making one point, that I like investing in universities, but please, we've got to change those curriculum. Those things are things that people were taught in the 50s, and the professors are still regurgitating the same old thing to people. We've got to make sure that the research being done is applicable to real problems, and that we can then support universities a lot more by applying research that solves problems. People don't eat papers, they eat food.
Wow.
And so I think that is a very important part. The other part of it is that, I don't know if Ada was here. I thought I saw, but she's not here, but you refer to her. Question we must ask is, who is the new farmer today? There's a new set of farmers developing all across Africa. And they don't look like the farmers you ever thought about. They are young, they are university graduates, they are doctors, engineers, lawyers, architects, all over the place. That's the new type of farmers. And when that happens, it creates excitement among others to say, oh, wait a minute, agriculture is not as bad as people are talking about. Let me give you my personal experience. My father was a farmer, grew up as a farmer. I was 14. I was admitted to the university. He said, no, you can't go because I don't want you to be a farmer. And 15, I took the exam. You always fill the forms for me all the time. First choice, medicine. Second choice, vet medicine. Third choice, dentistry. So first year, they said, no, your marks were not enough for medicine, so we will take you for agriculture. I went back again second year. They said, your marks were not enough for medicine. We'll take you for agriculture. Third year, when I applied again after I finished my A-levels, the same thing. My dad said, God must want you to be in agriculture. But later, my son, who is a medical doctor in the United States, when he graduated from medical school, I invited my father, who was 90 years old, to come. So my father came. And when we got there, he said, well, doctor. And I thought he normally calls me doctor, so I turned to him. I said, yes, Dad. He said, no, I mean the real doctor. And then I had to tell my father, my son came, the real doctor came, and I said, Dad, even the doctors will tell you, take 3 tablets 3 times a day, but only after food. So which means agriculture is more important.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Now, I'd like to introduce Dr. Louis Kasekende, who's sitting over there. He's the Deputy Governor of the Bank of Uganda. Dr. Kasekende, I'm very interested in finding out about financing, how governments can actually work. You've heard that there is a role to be played by governments, by central banks. Can we get the microphone to Dr. Kasekende, please? He's at the front, at the very front. And I'm very keen to hear from you what the experience is in Uganda, what needs to be done, what needs to be overcome. Because again, governments need to chip in. They do need to increase on how much they're spending on agriculture.
Thank you, Alan. I think there are issues that have come out in the presentation. One of them is the whole issue of de-risking. Commercial banks finding it highly risky to lend to agriculture. I'll start with that and then come to sizes of farms. And what governments, most governments have done, and at least in Uganda, is to find ways of risk sharing with the commercial banks. We have a facility now, the Agricultural Credit Facility, where government provides 50% of the resources at 0 interest rates, and then the commercial banks provide the other 50% at what would be commercial rates. And the weighted average of these two rates comes out at about 12%, compared to lending rates, which would be about 18, 19%. But most of this access to financing is for large scale, not in production, but large scale value addition. So the question then is, who is providing finance for production? Finance for production. For the large scale farmers, those can get access to finance mainly from commercial banks. The one area where we are challenged is the access to finance by small-scale farmers, and sometimes small-scale farmers who do not even own the land they are using for agriculture. We now have microfinance institutions and micro-deposit-taking institutions that lend to agriculture. But agriculture has to be a business for them to get money from the microfinance institutions. So I accept there is still a challenge of how do we get access to those who are small-scale farmers and small-scale farmers without collateral to qualify for financing from commercial enterprises.
Okay, President Adesina needs to go, but I'd like you to comment on that very briefly before you leave. Access for small-scale farmers. Can they knock on your door and ask for money and gain access to it?
Absolutely. I think small-scale farmers are absolutely bankable. I think at the end of the day, when people think about risk, they're thinking in terms of perceived risk, not always in terms of the real risk of lending. When I was minister in Nigeria, even before I became minister in Nigeria, I remember going to your country. I was then in the Rockefeller Foundation in the 90s. And I remember walking to the Centenary Rural Development Bank. There was a Vietnamese who was running the bank at the time. And I asked him, I would like you to lend to farmers who were taking the tissue culture bananas from Africa Harvest and others in Uganda. The yields have gone from 14 tons per hectare to 30 tons per hectare, but it costed $1.25 for a plantlet, so they couldn't afford it. So I said in the Rockefeller Foundation at the time, let me start an experiment. So we went to the Centenary Rural Development Bank, and I said, here's $500,000, lend it. The guy said he's not going to lend to farmers. I said, don't worry about it. Just lend the $500,000 on your balance sheet. But if it works, then I expect next year that you will have to lend $1 million of your own money. And that started the experiment. They lent the money. Then 4 years after, the Rockefeller Foundation did an assessment of that experiment. We found that the total amount that was lost, and it was lent to smallholder farmers producing small matoke bananas in their farms. The total amount lost was $4,350 in that period. The Rockefeller Foundation made more money in terms of the interest on that deposit than we lost. And that was how we started a massive work in Nigeria. When I was minister, we worked with the Central Bank of Nigeria, set up a $350 million facility to lend to agriculture value chain at scale. We leveraged $3.5 billion. And if you go to Nigeria today and you ask them, they raised the rates, the share of total bank portfolio going to the agricultural sector went from 0.7% when we started. Buka and I were there. We moved it to 5% of total bank portfolio in a period of 3 years, and the non-performing loans were less than 2%. We did the same in Tanzania with National Microfinance Bank. We did the same in Kenya with the Equity Bank. And so today, here are the lessons that I can share as I close. Is that you've got to fix the agricultural value chains first and the embedded risk within it. We've got to invest better in infrastructure, in clusters where farmers can make sure they don't lose most of what they produce. Right? We've got to then de-risk the financial markets to lend into a well-fixed, de-risk agricultural value chain. I think it works. It's a closed system. It works. If you have that, it works, and I can guarantee you that the smallholder farmers that you see today, they are the best farmers that you can have. Nobody wants to be poor. The only problem is that they have bounded conditions. They are constrained by lack of access to technology, to infrastructure, and in particular to finance. So if we move those things around, I think the same smallholder farmers that fed the world from Asia, the same African farmers will do wonders if we remove those things. And there I want to agree fully with FAO and also an IFAD that we want smallholder commercial farmers, but let's also be real. In every city you have small building, medium-sized building, and tall buildings. We need all. We need small, medium, and large farmers for Africa to do the kind of thing that Chiji put up there. We need all. We shouldn't just be ideological and just say it's just one group. So with that, sorry, I have to excuse myself to go to a panel, but thank you very much for being here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adesina, for being a part of this discussion. And now I'd like, again, to open up the discussion to the floor. You've had a free flow of ideas. Anybody, any more thoughts? Anybody that would like to say something? Let's get a microphone to the very front if we can, please. Anybody else? And there's a microphone that's needed over there. Are there any women putting up their hands anywhere? We won't be going on for much longer because we've obviously run out of time. But please, what's your point, sir?
Yeah, thank you, Alan. Thank you very much. My name is William Asiko. I'm the Executive Director of Grow Africa. Over the last 4 years, we've mobilized about $10 billion of private sector investment into agriculture. To date, only about 20% of that has actually been committed. And largely, the other 80% hasn't been committed because of enabling environment issues. I just wanted to find out from Chiji and the rest of the team from the African Development Bank, how will they address the issue of variability? We heard this afternoon from Presidents Kagame and Kenyatta that countries are moving at different paces. Some countries have gone further ahead in terms of creating enabling environments. Some countries are further behind. How are they dealing with this risk of variability and the fact that we have billions of dollars ready for investment, but they can't because of enabling environment issues? Thank you.
Very good point, and we shall be concluding this meeting in about 5 minutes. So if you just give us a bit of time before you leave, that would be highly appreciated. I'll give you 30 seconds to ask your question, sir.
Merci, Monsieur le Modérateur. Je voudrais remercier le président de la BAD d'avoir mis l'agriculture au cœur du processus de développement à nouveau. Ma question, elle est très simple. Le président a dit tout à l'heure, l'agriculture est une affaire. Et jusqu'à présent, l'agriculture n'est pas traitée comme une affaire par la plupart des paysans, en tout cas pas des paysans que nous connaissons dans le village. Les deux exemples de succès qu'on vient de nous donner tout à l'heure, les deux dames, sont des entrepreneurs agricoles. Donc ma question, elle est ceci. Dans le modèle que la BAD vient de nous présenter, qu'est-ce qu'elle a comme démarche pour que l'agriculture devienne vraiment une affaire pour la grande majorité des agriculteurs? Qu'il s'agit des petits agriculteurs actuels, des petits paysans actuels à transformer en entrepreneurs, qu'il s'agit d'attirer les étudiants, comme vous l'avez dit, ou les diplômés sans emploi, ou qu'il s'agit d'encourager les grands investisseurs dans le domaine de l'agriculture.
Okay, that's a question that I'll put to you. Perrin, Mr. Perrin, you seem to be the only one nodding on the panel. Everybody else was just staring like me. So he'll be responding to that question. But I think there is also the enabling environment question. And I'm throwing that to you, Chiji. What's your response to Mr. Masiko's question?
Thanks for the question that was posed. When I was giving out the 7 enablers that are necessary for transformation, one of the enablers I mentioned was the environment, the policy environment. And I did say that unless you have the right type of environment and the right type of reforms, then transformation will fail. I think that also came out in some of the discussions where in those countries where transformation has actually succeeded, the issue of leadership from the head of government or presidents of those countries were germane to the success. So we are working with the World Bank and other partners to see that we take the issue of policy environment very serious. The issue of farmers being overtaxed. The tariff issue that was mentioned under electricity is also important in agriculture, especially on water and irrigation. The issue of land is important. As you must have heard that most time women and the youths don't have the land, and something must have to be done. And what needs to be done is that the government must play a role, making sure that this environment is conducive for the type of transformation that we are looking at to take place.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Perrin.
You're right. The many, in fact too many, smallholders on the continent today are underperforming, and they are subsistence farmers. The pathway that has been identified by the leadership today in Africa recognizes that there is a need for transformation. That transformation will not happen by itself. There will be a need to build the capacity of the underperforming smallholder, ensure that they take and make use of good and appropriate technology, that there is financing available to buy inputs, to provide storage for their production, excess production, take the production to market, facilitate the use of mechanization, improve the yields by having irrigation, disease control of pests in livestock and crops. All these are the necessary steps that need to be taken to have that transformation agenda take place in the rural space. And there are many actors, and they are here today, that can provide the support. What we need is to speed it up.
Okay.
And to scale it up.
Let's give him a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. I have room for literally, there's a lady at the back, very briefly. You're a lady, I hope. Yes, you are.
Yes, thank you. My name is Caroline Kalunga. I'm from Zambia. My question is, what key measures is the African Development Bank and stakeholders taking to ensure that agri-products in Africa are given first priority on the African market and also promoted on the international market? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. And there's that gentleman over there, very, very briefly.
Yes, I surrender this question to me. My name is Sylvia Banda from Zambia. I run 2 businesses. One is the university. I own a university. And the other one, I promote the smallholder farmers. I've trained more than 20,000 farmers. But, you know, the growth is very, very slow because my farmers use a hoe and an axe, whereby to cut a tree, they will take 1 week. Because we don't have, the modern technology to use in order for them to, to grow. But when it comes to production, if in Zambia there is bumper harvest, those are my farmers that I look at and feel proud in my heart to say we have contributed to national development. So I concur with the Honorable asked the question how these farmers could be helped because they don't have any means of going to the bank because they look at them as a, farming as a risk business.
Okay.
Same with my students also. There is this training which the President ADB talked about. I know that when I walk into class next week, they'll ask me to say, Madam, how are we going to benefit from there? Maybe you can elaborate. Thank you.
Mr. Bukari, if you can, Mr. Bukari, please.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam, for your question. Let me start with the question about your students, and then I come back to that. Now, your students normally learn in school, and for us, most of us here, you have to identify what sort of training, skills training, enterprise development training. Here in Zambia, I know you are into quite a number of things that is being done. But what I would suggest is, one, there are now e-training, e-learning under Agora, and we have some programs, even within FAO. And then, of course, African Development Bank has those trainings. And one big training is for these students to learn the skill of becoming entrepreneurs or advisory service workers who can employ themselves. These are all very possible trainings that can be done. And I can tell you, the president of ADB would be specific on those. It could be linked to some financing that they can take off. But the KASU in Zambia, the conservation agriculture scaling up, I'm sure many of your farmers are part of those. And they are benefiting from that. And already this is something which is working. It's really going out on scale. The second aspect which I want to mention is we can organize and also facilitate as partners with the bank, IFAD, and others, EU, who are working, so that if you tell us exactly what area they are focusing on, we can facilitate that training. On your first question, which I didn't get clearly, but I had part of it, your first question.
The kind of training that we're talking about is entrepreneurship, because when students normally come, what we do is we work with other universities, especially the researchers, where we turn, research into business. We try to help the students to develop the businesses out of the research.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
So
this has to be
on that one. What I will also offer here is really the focus. I want you, as the proprietaries of the university, to look at your students and also to look at Zambia. I'm sure my colleague representative from Zambia, just behind you, Mr. George Okesh, will assist you to identify what are those agriculture business enterprises within the mandate of your students who are going to be entrepreneurs, and we will assist.
Okay.
And I hope that also IFAD, African Development Bank, will at some point will be able to come so that they will get some financing somewhere. But the startups that we can do, especially on the skills training.
Okay, thank you very much. And the last question, I'll put this to the lady. I'd like to have given it to Chiji, but we've run out of time. And now, the question about African products being given priority, I wonder if this is something that you share, and what more needs to be done. And I'm sure people like Chiji who make important decisions will make a note of it.
I think one very important element is that, as we said, the communication, branding some of the African product is something, it's a key element. And by putting a brand, this is what the private sector can, because this is an investment. And we don't need, in many other countries, many other continents, we buy product, we don't know from which country is it or from which farm is it, but we definitely need to have some branding for the African product. And I think Africa has now a very good image, and also if there are products even made by African women, it has also like organic product, but we also need from the market that Mother Nature is a natural. We cannot just squeeze the size of all the product in order to fit like a display in a supermarket somehow. We just need to have the product as they are. And I think branding the product, that's why communication is a key issue, and this is what private sector comes in to put this investment in the branding.
Okay, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to join me in thanking my panel very much. They all deserve a round of applause. And to conclude, those concluding remarks were made by Ms. Manal Abdelmonem. She's a businesswoman. And then before her, you heard from Mr. Bukar Tijani from FAO. And then, of course, Mr. Saint Ange Perrin, who is from IFAD. And finally, Mr. Chiji Ojukwu, who is the Director of Agriculture and Agro-Industry at the African Development Bank. My name is Alan Kasuja. Thank you very much.
much.